The air is still, thick with the tension that follows arrogance too far. Pam Bondi leans back, lips curve in a smirk that dares anyone to challenge her. Cameras zoom in. She's confident, untouchable, savoring the stage. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett doesn't flinch. Her eyes lock, unblinking. There's no raised voice, no anger. Just that calm before a storm that knows its own power. When Crockett finally speaks, it's not loud. It's lethal. Be careful how you lie about people who can prove you wrong. The words hang, heavy and exact. Silence floods the room. Bondi's smirk fades just enough for the cameras to catch it. You can almost hear the collective inhale from the audience. That instant recognition that something irreversible just happened. Cut to the echo outside. Clips looping on social feeds. Captions flashing. Pam Bondi just got checked in real time. Comment threads explode. Supporters cheer. Detractors scramble for defense. But Crockett doesn't gloat. She leans back, composed, as if the moment speaks for itself because it does. And yet, what made this warning so devastating wasn't just the words. It was why they landed. But to understand why this moment hit so hard, you have to know what led up to it. It began hours before the moment the internet would replay 1,000 times. A congressional hearing room, bright lights, restless murmurs, cameras poised for confrontation. The topic, justice and accountability, a conversation that had long since blurred into theater. Pam Bondi arrived with the confidence of someone used to controlling the script. Her tone rehearsed, her charm precise, every word designed to sting without consequence. She spoke not to find truth, but to perform it. Bondi leaned into partisan rhythms, the language of superiority wrapped in smiles. She framed herself as the protector of American values, twisting policy into spectacle. Every jab aimed at the other side wasn't just strategy, it was a smirk aimed at history itself. Across the table, Jasmine Crockett sat silent, her notes untouched. While Bondi basked in the attention, Crockett studied her. Not the words, but the pattern. She'd seen this kind of arrogance before, the kind that mistakes volume for authority and privilege for proof. Her stillness wasn't weakness, it was preparation. Viewers watching a live feed began to sense the shift before it happened. Comments streamed in, quick and electric. You could feel something was about to snap. Crockett's too calm. She's waiting for her moment. Bondi laughed mid-sentence, unaware that her performance was crumbling in real time. Each confident phrase only made the contrast sharper. Smugness on one side, quiet conviction on the other. The camera caught it perfectly. Bondi gesturing with theatrical flair, Crockett unmoving. Her eyes patient, her body language unbothered. That patience became its own kind of power, a reminder that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. And when Bondi pushed too far, when her facts slipped into fabrication, and the smirk became a sneer, you could almost hear the shift in the air. The crowd's energy changed. The spectacle was about to become a reckoning. For the first time, Bondi looked unsure. The rhythm of control faltered. Across from her, Crockett finally moved, a small motion, but enough to signal what was coming. Because what happened next wasn't just a clapback. It was a warning that echoed far beyond that room. Pam Bondi's story begins in the glow of television lights, the kind that make ambition look like righteousness. Once hailed as a rising star of conservative politics, she mastered the art of projection. The crisp tone, the immaculate smile, the polished certainty that made her appear unshakable. She wasn't just a prosecutor. She was a performer in a courtroom built for cameras. Her rise was a study in timing and tone. In Florida, she branded herself the defender of law and order, the champion of American values. But beneath the slogan was something colder, a calculation that turned empathy into weakness and power into performance. She learned quickly that conviction on screen mattered more than conviction in court. Clips from old interviews show her seated across from friendly hosts, the lighting soft, her language rehearsed. "I believe in accountability," she'd say, her voice smooth as glass. Yet behind the curtain were decisions that told another story. selective prosecutions, high-profile allies shielded from scrutiny, and a pattern of outrage that seemed to depend on who was sitting in the crosshairs. Her allegiance to the powerful became both her armor and her blind spot. When political elites called, she answered. When cameras rolled, she turned every scandal into a sermon. It wasn't truth she defended, it was image. Headlines from her tenure flicker across the screen like ghosts of credibility. Pam Bondi faces questions over Trump donation. Critics slam Bondi for selective outrage in criminal justice cases. Each controversy would fade, polished away by the next press appearance, the next declaration that she was just doing her job. Her style was unmistakable, the calm confidence of someone who's never truly been challenged. Even her critics admitted, Bondi knew how to perform outrage without losing composure. But that was the performance's flaw. It relied on control. Every debate, every interview, every confrontation was designed to make her look composed while her opponents looked emotional. And for years it worked. She perfected the tone of condescension disguised as civility, the smirk that said, "I've already won." To her followers, she was the voice of order in a chaotic world. To her detractors, she was the embodiment of hypocrisy, a face of authority that protected privilege while preaching morality. Her brand flourished on television panels and campaign stages. She leaned into phrases that triggered applause lines: lawlessness, protect our children, restore America's greatness. Yet the more she spoke of virtue, the clearer the cracks became. Clips replay in ironic contrast. Her condemning dishonesty while defending dishonest allies, denouncing corruption while dining beside it. There's a strange poetry in watching the contradictions pile up, each one a thread waiting to be pulled. By the time she entered the national spotlight again, her persona was bulletproof, or so she thought. She'd faced critics before, dismissed them with charm, and practiced deflection. What she hadn't faced was someone who refused to play her game. Her confidence that day wasn't arrogance without cause. It was habit. Bondi had built a career on the assumption that no one could outmaneuver her under pressure. She believed truth could be out-talked. That presentation was protection. But what happens when the performance meets someone who isn't performing? As she walked into that hearing room, she didn't see a threat. She saw another politician with feelings. She didn't realize Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to argue. She was there to expose. Bondi had built her empire on the illusion that she controlled the narrative. What she didn't know was that this time, the story wasn't hers to tell, because Bondi was about to meet someone who didn't play by her rules, and who carried truth like a weapon. Jasmine Crockett's story doesn't begin with privilege or proximity to power. It begins with purpose. Long before the cameras, before the congressional lights and the viral moments, she was a young woman watching injustice unfold and deciding that silence would never sit easily on her shoulders. She didn't come from the corridors of legacy. She came from the grind, from classrooms and courtrooms where being underestimated was routine and winning meant being twice as good just to be seen as equal. As a public defender, she learned early that the law could be both weapon and shield. She stood beside people society had already written off, facing prosecutors who treated poverty like guilt. In those moments, she found her voice, not by shouting, but by speaking with a precision that cut through prejudice. She discovered that calm was its own form of defiance. When she transitioned from defense work to the political arena, that same fire traveled with her. It wasn't loud. It was focused. Every committee hearing, every policy debate, every televised confrontation carried that same energy, truth sharpened by patience. Clips from earlier exchanges show her dissecting misinformation with surgical control, responding to condescension with composure that only made her opponents look smaller. Her supporters saw it and rallied around it. This balance of grace and grit that felt rare in an era of chaos. She doesn't just fight, one voter said. She corrects. It became her quiet signature, a style of strength that spoke to everyone who had ever been dismissed, mocked, or told to calm down when they were right. As a black woman in politics, Crockett knew every word she spoke was judged twice, once for meaning and once for tone. She learned to weaponize composure, to make stillness her armor. When critics tried to bait her, she let them expose themselves. When they tried to rattle her, she reminded them, gently but unmistakably, that dignity wasn't submission, it was strategy. Her journey wasn't a straight line upward. It was trial after trial, moments of exhaustion, of doubt, of questioning whether truth could ever be enough. But every setback only refined her focus. Every insult became a quiet promise that she would never let arrogance define the limits of her impact. So when she entered that hearing room opposite Pam Bondi, she carried more than a folder of facts. She carried every courtroom she'd survived. Every condescending smirk she dismantled. Every moment someone mistook her grace for weakness. The contrast was cinematic. Bondi's polished certainty against Crockett's lived truth. Bondi performed for approval. Crockett spoke for accountability. Bondi wielded charm like armor. Crockett wielded clarity like light. And in that light, the illusion began to crack. Viewers watching didn't just see a political exchange. They saw a generational reckoning. One woman representing the system that punished truth, and another representing the courage to speak it anyway. Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to make headlines or chase applause. She was there to correct, to turn distortion into dialogue, ego into evidence, and deceit into self-destruction. So when Pam Bondi tried to twist her words, Crockett didn't flinch. She delivered a warning that froze the room. The confrontation began with the smallest spark. A tone, a glance, a smile that wasn't a smile at all. Pam Bondi leaned into her microphone, her voice smooth but cutting, her words wrapped in the kind of civility that disguises condescension. "Well, Congresswoman, perhaps you misunderstood the facts," she said, her lips curling in satisfaction before the sentence was even complete. Crockett didn't move. Her hands rested neatly on the table, fingers interlaced. Her gaze steady, unblinking. Bondi mistook that stillness for surrender. The exchange played out like choreography. Bondi interrupting mid-sentence, adding her own spin to Crockett's remarks, shifting words to fit her narrative. The audience, both in the room and watching from home, could feel the disrespect simmering. Every pause carried weight. Every interruption, a spark of friction. Bondi's confidence grew with each jab. "You see, Congresswoman, what you're suggesting is simply not grounded in reality," she said, gesturing for effect. The line earned a few polite laughs from her allies. She looked pleased, certain that composure meant capitulation. But Crockett's silence wasn't retreat. It was restraint, a slow, deliberate letting of the rope, letting Bondi pull herself closer to the edge without realizing it. The camera panned between them. Bondi smiling tightly, Crockett's expression unreadable. The tension was unbearable, the kind that makes every breath sound louder than it should. Viewers online began to comment in real time. "She's testing her patience. Crockett's about to end this. You can see it coming." Bondi pushed again, twisting Crockett's words until they barely resembled truth. "So, if I understand correctly," she said, tilting her head, "you're defending chaos as justice?" Her tone was mocking, her delivery rehearsed. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Even through the cameras, you could feel it, the sense that Bondi had gone too far, that her performance had crossed from confidence into cruelty. Crockett blinked once, slow, then she exhaled. Every second that followed felt like a match being dragged across sandpaper, the world waiting for the flame. And that's when Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, and the tone of the room changed forever. For a long second, no one breathed. Crockett's chair shifted just slightly as she leaned toward the microphone, the movement small but seismic. When she spoke, her tone was low, deliberate, the kind of calm that makes everyone lean in without knowing why. "Ms. Bondi," she began, "you've repeated that line 3 times now, and every time you've twisted the facts a little tighter. Maybe that works on talk shows. But not here." The room went silent. Her words didn't rise, they cut. She let the quiet sit between each phrase, forcing it to sting. "I came here with the receipts. You came here with rehearsed outrage. There's a difference. Bondi shifted, the practiced smile faltering for the first time. She opened her mouth to interject, but Crockett's tone didn't allow it. You've built a brand on pretending that justice is your property, Crockett continued, steady as a heartbeat. You call yourself a truth teller, yet the moment truth stops flattering you, you label it bias. A rustle moved through the crowd, journalists glancing up from their notes, cameras refocusing. The rhythm of the hearing had changed. This was no longer debate, it was exposure. Crockett's gaze never left Bondi's. See, what you call confidence is really fear dressed up nice. Fear of accountability. Fear of women who don't need permission to speak. Her voice softened, each word heavier than the last. You mistake silence for weakness because you've never learned what restraint feels like. Bondi blinked hard, jaw tightening. The air thickened with the sound of pride cracking. Crockett let one beat pass. Then came the line that would echo far beyond the walls of the hearing room. When you weaponize lies against women who built their lives on truth, understand this. Truth doesn't tremble. A gasp rippled through the chamber. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God." Cameras flashed. The smirk that had anchored Bondi's confidence dissolved, replaced by the stunned stillness of someone who'd lost control of her own performance. Crockett didn't smirk back. She simply sat back, folding her hands again, voice cooling to near whisper. You can try to talk over me, but you can't talk over evidence. You can mock me, but you can't erase what's on record. Bondi looked down at her notes, suddenly meaningless. The contrast between them, one unraveling, one unbothered, told the story better than any headline could. Within minutes, the moment detonated online. Split screens appeared across feeds, Bondi frozen mid-blink, Crockett calm, eyes fixed ahead. Tweets rolled in faster than anchors could read them. Hashtag truth doesn't tremble. Hashtag Crockett warning. Hashtag Pam Bondi exposed. Clips looped with cinematic edits. Slow-motion zooms on the phrase truth doesn't tremble, captions in bold, orchestral music swelling underneath. Influencers reposted the quote with fire emojis. Commentators called it the moment arrogance met accountability. On TikTok, creators stitched reactions, mouths open, captions flashing sheet AT. On Instagram, the quote appeared over black and white stills of Crockett's calm expression. Even news outlets that had once dismissed her composure now called it textbook power. But inside the hearing room, the mood wasn't celebration, it was reckoning. Bondi avoided eye contact. The committee chair cleared his throat, trying to restore order, but the air had already shifted. The old rules of dominance no longer applied. Crockett stayed silent, letting the echo of her words carry their own authority. She didn't need to add more. The silence now belonged to her. Reporters later said it felt like watching a tide turn. Not in volume, but in gravity. For the first time, Bondi's certainty looked fragile, and Crockett's restraint looked like command. The camera lingered on their faces, one stunned, one serene. The world had just watched arrogance dissolve under truth. But the shockwave didn't end in that room. It erupted across the country. The moment left the chamber, but it didn't stay contained. Within an hour, clips of Jasmine Crockett's calm dismantling of Pam Bondi were everywhere. TikTok was first. Quick-cut edits paired Crockett's chilling line with cinematic music, captions pulsing. When you weaponize lies against women who built their lives on truth, truth doesn't tremble. It spread like electricity. Duets flooded in, law students, activists, even high schoolers mouthing the words like a mantra. One creator wrote, "She didn't shout. She showed up. That's power." Another stitched Bondi's smirk, fading with the caption, "The moment confidence met consequence." By sunset, hashtag Crockett warning had over 40 million views. Commentators scrambled to interpret the moment. Political analysts on late-night panels called it a masterclass in controlled confrontation. Feminist writers called it a turning point in how women wield authority under pressure. Even skeptical hosts admitted, grudgingly, that Crockett had outclassed her opponent without ever raising her voice. Meanwhile, Bondi launched her damage control tour. She appeared on sympathetic talk shows, downplaying the exchange. It was just a spirited discussion, she insisted, but her attempts to reframe the narrative only fueled the memes. Viewers clipped her contradictions side by side with Crockett's unflinching stare. Hashtags mocked the spin. Hashtag Pampressed. Hashtag Law and Order Who. Behind the headlines, something deeper was shifting. In classrooms, teachers replayed the clip as an example of composure under provocation. A communications professor tweeted, "This is how you dismantle aggression. Not by matching tone, but by mastering tempo." Activists shared it as a rallying cry for women in power, calling it poise as protest. On Instagram, a viral post summed it up perfectly. Crockett didn't dominate the room. She redirected its gravity. Celebrities joined the chorus. Kerry Washington reposted the clip with a single caption, "Grace under fire." Ava DuVernay added, "Truth doesn't tremble. Remember that." Even late-night comedians got in on it, showing split screens of Bondi's stunned silence and Crockett's calm expression, cutting to applause. But for all the celebration, Crockett remained composed in her response. When asked about the viral storm, she said simply, "I wasn't performing. I was correcting." That line, humble, direct, only amplified the respect she earned. What started as a hearing became a cultural touchstone. Crockett's restraint had redefined what power could look like. Not volume, not anger, but unwavering clarity. Bondi's team tried to keep pace, but the internet had chosen its symbol. The viral machine wasn't mocking anymore. It was marveling. Because Crockett hadn't just won an argument. She'd shifted a narrative. She showed that silence, when anchored in truth, could roar louder than any shout. And yet for Jasmine Crockett, it was never about trending. It was about truth. In the days that followed, Jasmine Crockett didn't bask in the attention. She redirected it. In one interview, when asked if she enjoyed humiliating Pam Bondi, she smiled softly and replied, "I don't need to humiliate anyone. The truth does that on its own." That sentence landed like a quiet thunderclap. It wasn't gloating, it was grounding. She turned what had been a viral confrontation into a meditation on integrity. Crockett spoke about restraint as strategy, not weakness. "People confuse composure with compliance," she said. "But composure is control. It means you decide the temperature of the room, not them." Her words reframed the entire exchange. The moral wasn't about dominance. It was about discipline. Dignity, she showed, isn't silence, it's precision. It's the ability to hold your truth steady while others try to shake it. And in that steadiness, she modeled something bigger than debate. She modeled transformation. Analysts began quoting her in essays about leadership under pressure. Activists used her words in teach-ins about advocacy and tone. It became clear that Crockett hadn't just won a viral moment. She had redefined what political power could sound like. No theatrics, no shouting match, just evidence delivered like poetry and conviction that didn't need volume to be heard. The lesson rippled outward. This wasn't about left or right. It was about accountability, about refusing to let arrogance rewrite reality, about understanding that truth, when spoken with calm authority, doesn't just challenge lies, it dissolves them. Her moment became a mirror for everyone watching, for every person who's ever been talked over, doubted, or dismissed. Crockett's presence said what words often can't, that being underestimated is its own advantage if you know how to use it. Clips of her interviews began circulating with captions like, "Dignity isn't quiet, it's strategic." Teachers used her hearing footage to discuss communication under stress. Parents showed their daughters her response as proof that strength doesn't always shout. Crockett's calm became a cultural language, a new grammar of power that didn't rely on spectacle but on substance. And for those who saw themselves in her, the message was unmistakable. Every person watching who's ever been underestimated, this moment was for you. Because sometimes the most powerful act of resistance isn't shouting back. It's standing still, unshaken, while the noise collapses around you. And in that stillness, something revolutionary happens. Arrogance loses its echo. Because when arrogance speaks loudest, composure becomes revolution. Pam Bondi looked unshakable. until Jasmine Crockett spoke. One warning, delivered with composure sharper than any insult, shattered the illusion. Arrogance trembled. Truth stood calm. As headlines replayed her chilling words, "Be careful how you lie about people who can prove you wrong." A new standard was set for power, not in volume, but in control. If you believe composure is power, share this moment. Subscribe and stand with the movement proving that dignity still wins, and truth never needs to shout to be heard. Fade out. Crockett's voice lingers, soft but unforgettable.